Yo, what's up everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy channel, and in this video, I'm going to give you my top startums and situms heading into week 8 of the 2021 fantasy football season. I am actually recording this after the Thursday night football game. I'm recording this on Saturday, so I'm not going to be giving you any starts and sits for that game, but we're just going to talk about the Sunday and Monday games coming up here. But before we get into the week 8 games, I am going to recap how we did in week 7, and honestly, we didn't do that bad. My quarterback calls of starting Tua and Matt Stafford were amazing. Tua was the quarterback 1 overall on the week with about 28.5 fantasy points, so that was a huge hit for us. And then Matt Stafford, against his former team, the Detroit Lions, finished as the quarterback 3 overall on the week with 27.16 points, so another massive hit right there. At running back, I like Damien Harris as a high running back 2. Well, he finished as a running back, like the overall running back 3. So when I say a high running back 2, if you're a running back 1, you're in the top 12, running back 2, 13 to 24, so on and so forth. So he was the 3rd overall running back. He put up 24.3 points, and that was another massive hit for us. And this is in half PPR. That's the scoring I just generally go off of when I make these types of videos. If I am talking about it in a different format, I'll usually note otherwise, but I'm going to go off of half PPR. Darrell Henderson was not the best call for me. I don't know who was really sitting Darrell Henderson, but he didn't do that great. 7.9 fantasy points, running back 28. I liked him as a must-start running back 1. So that was a miss for me. He didn't completely, tank your team, but yeah, running back 28 is really not going to cut it. But to me, that presents a nice buy low opportunity for Darrell Henderson because I expect him to be awesome moving forward. I like Cordarrelle Patterson as a low running back 1. And while he didn't quite finish in the running back 1 range, he was the running back 18 overall, 13.1 points. So that was a nice little hit there. He did get saved a little bit by a touchdown, though. I also said to play Chuba, Hubbard. I liked him, honestly, as a low running back 1 with all the people on bye, and he only finished as a running back 37.6 points. That was definitely a miss, kind of like Darrell Henderson. They just didn't really do much. But James Conner, our final running back call last week, I liked him as a nice running back 2 play. He finished as a running back 19 overall, 12.4 points. So that is pretty much exactly what I expected out of him. So that was a nice hit. At wide receiver, DJ Moore. I liked him as a kind of mid wide receiver 1. He finished as a wide receiver 26 with 10.3 half PPR points. That was a usable week, so I'm not going to say it was a complete miss, but it definitely was not a hit. Chris Godwin, on the other hand, was a nice hit for us. I liked him as a high wide receiver 2. He finished as the wide receiver 6 overall in the week with 21.1 points, so that was a big hit. I said to start Brandin Cooks as a safe wide receiver 2 play. Well, he did nothing. He was a wide receiver 52 on the week, put up 4.6 half PPR points, so that was a big miss. Another miss was Darnell Mooney. I liked him as a high wide receiver 3, so my expectations weren't that high. I just kind of liked him, and I thought maybe he had some upside as well, but he really didn't do much. Wide receiver 47 on the week, 4.9 half PPR points, so that was a big miss. And then I said to start Sterling Shepard, but he actually didn't end up playing, so that's just a DNP. And then at tight end, the last 2 starts I had were Dallas Goedert and Mike Gesicki. Dallas Goedert was the tight end 7. 10.5 points, so that was a nice hit. I liked him as a mid-tier tight end 1, and I also liked Gesicki as a mid-tier tight end 1, and he finished as the tight end 3 on the week with 18 fantasy points, so 2 hits right there. So we had a few misses, but nothing too crazy. And then in terms of sits, this is where I tend to get my sit calls wrong a lot more than my starts. So I said to sit Daniel Jones. I liked him, if you needed him in like a 2 quarterback league, but that was about it. He finished as a quarterback 16 on the week with about 16.5 points. So he was usable. If you did sit him, though, you're probably not like really regretting it. So it's not really a hit or a miss. Khalil Herbert, I said to sit him against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I only liked him as a low running back 2, high running back 3. And he finished as the running back 9 on the week with 15.8 fantasy points. I don't know how he did it against Tampa Bay with how bad the Bears offense looked, but he did it. That was a big miss for me. And then Corey Davis was my final sit last week. And how a touchdown can change everything. He was only 4 for 47, but he got saved by the touchdown. He did get in the end zone, so he finished as a wide receiver 19, 12.7 fantasy points and half PPR. So even though the process looked right on paper, he got in the end zone and it did end up being a miss. All right, so that was the week 7 recap. We did pretty good, but I think we can do even better in week 8. So I'm going to start with giving you my top startums of week 8, go position by position, and then move on to the situms and go position by position from there. All right, and I am going to start with the quarterbacks, and the first guy on the list is Patrick Mahomes of the Chiefs. And before you get on me about this being too obvious of a call, I'm going to explain why I have him on this list, all right? So Mahomes is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, even for, for fantasy and real life. He is normally an auto start each and every week, but coming off of a bad game and a good matchup against the Titans, this is just a reminder to not overreact. He is one of the game's best quarterbacks, as I said, and I do expect a bounce-back game for him this week against the New York Giants. He's a high quarterback one play, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Don't overthink it. Unless you have a guy like Josh Allen as well or something like that, you really should not be considering sitting Patrick Mahomes. Now, for my second and final quarterback stardom this week, I'm going to go with a guy that's a little bit lower down on the list of quarterbacks, and that's going to be Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings, Skull Vikings. I expect this to be a high-scoring game in Week 8 with Dallas. Minnesota is coming off the bye week, and they're playing on Sunday night on Halloween against the Cowboys. I'm really excited for that game. But the Vikings should be throwing the ball quite a bit in this game. I think Dalvin Cook will also be, a good play this week, obviously, at running back. But I think the Vikings are going to have to throw it a little bit. And I think Kirk Cousins can find Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, his top two wide receivers. I think he can find them for some big plays against the Cowboys, who are giving up the 6th most points to quarterbacks. For me, he is a low quarterback one this week against Dallas. And I can even show you, here's the chart that I'm using to give you guys the points against. So here are the Cowboys for quarterback. They are currently 6th according to this Fantasy Pros chart. Now I'm going to move on to my running back stardoms for Week 8. And the first guy I'm going to talk about is Joe Mixon, running back of the Cincinnati Bengals. He gets one of the best matchups in all of fantasy football in terms of fantasy points to running backs against the New York Jets this week in Week 8. The Jets just gave up huge games to 3 Patriots running backs last week, with Damien Harris, Brandin Bolden, and J.J. Taylor all finishing as top 13 running backs in half PPR. So they were basically all 3 running back ones. Damien Harris put up 24.3 points, finished as a running back 3 overall, like I mentioned earlier, because I did make him a stardom last week. And this is a matchup you just want to attack against the Jets. Long story short, the Jets are giving up the most points to running backs this season in fantasy, as you can see on this little chart right here. And I do expect the Bengals to be winning this game. The Jets are a bad team. They're missing their starting quarterback. Corey Davis is listed as doubtful as of this recording. So in a game that I think the Bengals are going to be winning, Joe Mixon should see plenty of opportunity for success in this amazing matchup. He is a low to mid running back one for me this week. The next running back on this list is going to be Darrell Henderson of the Los Angeles Rams. This is a guy that I had on the list last week, and he did not meet my high expectations in the game last week in a great matchup against the Detroit Lions, but he will get another crack at exposing a good running back matchup this week against the Houston Texans. He's been great all season. Last week, he just didn't really put up too many points, but he's been great all season. And I do like him this week in another good matchup as a low running back one play with huge upside if the Rams decide to run in a couple touchdowns instead of let Stafford throw them in. So I think it's going to be all Rams in this one, and I expect Darrell Henderson to eat. All right, so my next running back stardom this week is going to be Darrell Williams of the Kansas City Chiefs. He gets to take on the New York Jets. So a couple weeks ago in Week 6, filling in for an injured Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he had a huge game against Washington, putting up 22.4 half PPR points, got in the end zone twice. But last week, he only saw 8 touches in a blowout loss. And even with that, he put up 6.5 points on 8 touches. So he just didn't see a lot of volume. But yeah, the game script was just horrible for Darrell Williams because they were getting blown out like easily the whole game pretty much. But I do think that the Chiefs offense in general is going to bounce back against the New York Giants. And they will either be leading this game or it will be a competitive game. So I don't think they're going to get blown out again. And that will allow Darrell Williams to see better volume than he did last week. And it's a pretty nice matchup with the New York Giants, excuse me. For me, he is a low to mid running back too. So not a must start. You might have better options, but he's definitely someone worth considering as a low to mid running back too, like I said. My final running back stardom this week is going to be Khalil Herbert, running back for the Chicago Bears. And he's been great as the lead back with David Montgomery out. David Montgomery, their normal lead running back, has been on injured reserve, and he seems to have surpassed Damien Williams as the guy. Damien Williams was activated off the COVID list in Week 7 against the Buccaneers, and he really didn't see too many touches compared to Khalil Herbert. Who knows if that was maybe just a result of being on the COVID list, and maybe they'll use more of Damien Williams this week. But after he exposed the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' elite run defense last week, that being Khalil Herbert, I don't know how they don't continue to feed Khalil Herbert, at least until David Montgomery is back. I made him a sit last week, actually, and he ran all over the Tampa Bay Bucks elite run defense, and he shut me up completely. He should see enough volume and is talented enough to be a solid low to mid running back 2 this week. For example, I have David Montgomery on my team. He got put on IR. I picked up Khalil Herbert. I didn't play him last week. I played Mike Davis last week. Well, this week I am playing Khalil Herbert over Mike Davis in week 8. Now I'm going to move on to my stardom wide receivers, and I'm going to talk about the top 2 wide receiver options for the Buffalo Bills, Stefon Diggs and Emmanuel Sanders. Now, I have put these 2 guys on my stardoms quite a bit this season. Emmanuel Sanders, because he's been way more involved than most people expected before the season. And I'd just like to remind you guys that he is a great play most weeks, especially if you're in like a 3 wide receiver league. And I put Diggs on the list quite a bit because he had a pretty slow start to the season, at least for his standards. But I can probably only justify putting Diggs on this list for 1 more week. So I am going to include him here as a smash wide receiver 1 play against the Miami Dolphins, who are giving up the 2nd most points to fantasy wide receivers, according to this chart. Actually, I got to go to wide receivers. So yeah, they're giving up the 2nd most points to fantasy wide receivers this season. And Stefon Diggs, he's been putting it together a little bit here. 2 of his last 3 games have been really productive for fantasy, and I expect that to continue in week 8 against the Miami Dolphins. And like I said, I do like Emmanuel Sanders as well. Here's a quick look at what he's been doing lately before their week 7 bye week. His first 2 weeks, he didn't put up too many points, but he was involved. I told you guys, go get this guy. And then the last 4 weeks, he has been very relevant for fantasy as a guy that went late in drafts or undrafted at the beginning of the year. So I really like him this week as well as a low wide receiver 2, high wide receiver 3 with upside for a big game, because he has shown the ability to, he's had multiple 2 touchdown games. So he does have that big game ability as well. And like Stefon Diggs, speaking of guys that I probably shouldn't even be justifying putting on this list anymore because they're pretty obvious stardoms at this point, I am going to also talk about Deebo Samuel on this list, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers. As long as Jimmy Garoppolo is starting in San Francisco, I love Deebo Samuel pretty much each and every week. He wasn't selected very early in drafts, but now that he's currently a high wide receiver 1 in total season scoring 7 weeks into the season, going on 8 weeks now, I'm not sure how much longer I can get away with putting him on this stardom list without it being too obvious of a call, like I said. Because he really should be considered an auto start most weeks. But regardless, I'm here to remind you how good Deebo has been on the season, and I expect him to be great in week 8 against the Chicago Bears. He's on the list because he has been awesome, and the Bears are giving up the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers, as you can see on the chart right here. They're at number 5, and the Bears just got absolutely destroyed through the air by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week. Deebo Samuel is a low to mid wide receiver 1 play this week in week 8. Next up at wide receiver, I got Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski did not play last week, and Chris Godwin and Mike Evans both capitalized with awesome fantasy games against the Chicago Bears. As I just mentioned when I was talking about Deebo Samuel, they just annihilated them through the air. Antonio Brown, it's looking like he's going to be out again this week. And even though I heard there is a good chance Rob Gronkowski might play in week 8 against the New Orleans Saints, the Saints, who the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are playing, they are allowing the 4th most points to wide receivers in fantasy. I'll just show you guys the chart right here. There's wide receivers. They're giving up the 4th most. So obviously he's a smash play this week. This Tampa Bay offense is elite, and I love Chris Godwin this week as a low wide receiver 1 play, but he does have a little bit of upside as well if he is able to find the end zone a time or two. He has been utilized in the red zone area, so let's just say, last week Mike Evans got 3 touchdowns. Maybe this week Chris Godwin can get a multi-touchdown game. Obviously, I'm not saying it's a guaranteed thing, but if that does happen, that's where he has that big upside as well. And he's also a very safe play in addition to having that upside. Now I'm going to talk about DJ Moore, wide receiver of the Carolina Panthers. Even with Sam Darnold and the Carolina offense struggling in general, DJ Moore has still put up 73 yards each of the last 2 weeks, as you can see right there. And obviously that isn't crazy production, you know what I'm saying? But even if he keeps doing roughly what he's been doing the last couple of weeks and he gets a touchdown, all of a sudden you're really happy with his fantasy production. He just hasn't, had a big game lately, hasn't gotten in the end zone for a while. So it's a little bit frustrating. I get it. But he is a talented player and he's still seeing a ton of targets, as you can see right here. And I know it's been frustrating to play him lately, but unless you have other top tier options to replace him with, I would just stick with him against the Atlanta Falcons as a high wide receiver to play this week. And my final wide receiver stardom for week 8 is Michael Pittman Jr., wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. And he's been great for fantasy this season. I did unfortunately make him a stardom in one of his few down games against the Houston Texans in week 6. That was sandwiched right in between two other awesome games for fantasy. So that's kind of just the way it is sometimes. Wide receivers aren't always the most consistent producers of fantasy points. But if you take a holistic look at Michael Pittman Jr. this year, he has been awesome for fantasy. He gets a good matchup this week as well against the Tennessee Titans in week 8. They are giving up the third most points to wide receivers in fantasy football. So he's been great. It's a good matchup. I like him as a low to mid wide receiver to play in week 8. Now I'm going to give you guys 2 tight end stardoms this week. And obviously when I make these lists, I don't like to give you guys obvious calls unless it's like Mahomes where he's coming off of a bad game, right? So I'm not going to give you guys like Travis Kelce, those type of guys, but I'm going to give you a little more under the radar guys. And the first one I'm going to talk to you about is Hunter Henry, tight end of the New England Patriots. This isn't a guy that I'm playing over those top elite options, but he has scored 4 games in a row. And I would not be surprised if he makes it 5 in a row in a revenge game against his former team, the Chargers. Darren Waller and Mark Andrews are on bye this week, so maybe Hunter Henry's on your waiver wire. You can scoop him up and hope he scores. He hasn't really put up too many yards, as you can see. He had a 75-yard game in there. But yeah, he's been a little bit touchdown dependent, so he's kind of a guy I'm putting in there hoping for a touchdown. But even just banking on a touchdown, he is still a low tight end 1 play for me because the tight end position is not that deep. Now I'm going to give you guys a player that I like a little bit more than Hunter Henry. I think he offers a little bit more upside in terms of yardage, and I also think he has a good chance of getting in the end zone this week, and that is Dallas Goedert, tight end of the Philadelphia Eagles. He is now the lead tight end in Philadelphia, with Zach Ertz being traded to Arizona. Last week in his first game after the Zach Ertz trade, he put up 70 yards, which honestly, as a fantasy tight end, that is not bad at all. I expect Dallas Goedert to be a part of the game plan most weeks, and this matchup with the Lions does not scare me one bit. He is a mid to high tight end 1 against the Detroit Lions in week 8 for me. And now we are going to move on to my sit-ems. I'm going to give you a few quarterback sits this week. I have more sits than normal. And I have 3 quarterbacks. So the first one is going to be Taylor Heinicke of the Washington football team. And I'm going to be honest, I like Taylor Heinicke. He's a fun player. And he has had his games this year where he has been productive for fantasy. You can see his totals right here. He's kind of been up and down, but he's had, some 20-plus point games in there. So he has been relevant for fantasy. So this isn't me just taking someone from the bottom of the barrel and telling you not to start him. This is a guy who has been relevant. But he does play the Denver Broncos this week, who are giving up the second fewest points to quarterbacks in fantasy, at least according to that chart that I've been showing you guys. So to me, he is nothing more than a desperate 2-quarterback play. Obviously, I'd play him over whoever's starting for the Jets, for example. But yeah, unless you're, in like a 2-quarterback league where you're a little weak at QB, I would probably be looking for other options. And quickly, pretty much every week, I have to talk about this guy. But speaking of scraping the bottom of the barrel, this is where Justin Fields belongs for fantasy football, at least. He just has done absolutely nothing for fantasy. And I will continue to advise you to not start him each and every week until he proves that he can consistently show anything. He scored single-digit points in all the games that he started, except for this one against the Packers. He put up 14.3, and that's a lot for him. So this Bears offense is just a mess right now, and I'm going to talk about a few other Bears in this sit-em list as well. But before we get to any more Bears, I do have one final quarterback to talk about, and then I actually have another non-Bear running back to talk about, and then we'll get to a couple Bears. But I am going to talk about Mac Jones as my final sit-em quarterback for Week 8. I expect the Patriots in this game against the Chargers to try to lean on the running game against them because they've been a little weak against the running back position. So unless the Patriots are down big, I don't think Mac Jones is going to be chucking the rock around too much. He's a low-end quarterback too for me, so kind of like Taylor Heinicke. Maybe you have to play him in a 2-quarterback league or something like that, but I am trying to find better options than Mac Jones, just in a vacuum in general. And my one and only sit-em running back is going to be Mike Davis of the Atlanta Falcons. This was a guy in draft season I was pretty high on. I thought he'd be a nice, secure volume play for the whole season, but, he's been surpassed by Cordarrelle Patterson as the main running back there. It just is what it is. He played more snaps than you would probably expect, though, last week. He played 60% of snaps. He only saw 4 carries, so you would think he wasn't involved at all, but he was on the field for 60% of snaps, right? So I'm seeing a lot of people dropping him. In leagues where I'm really weak with running back depth, I'm trying to scoop him up a little bit. Obviously, it's not an exciting guy to add, but this week, I really don't like him because, like I said, it's clear Cordarrelle Patterson has taken over the backfield in Atlanta. And while I do expect him to have more volume this week than he did last week, he gets a tough matchup against his former team, the Carolina Panthers. Coming off of a game where he put up 1 fantasy point, only saw 4 carries, you really can't put him in your lineup. If you're really desperate, for me at least, he is a low running back 3 at best this week, but I'm looking elsewhere. Now, here is one of those Chicago Bears that I said I was going to mention later on in this list. And it pains me to say it, but I'm going to keep putting him on this list pretty regularly until he does something kind of like Justin Fields, and those things go hand in hand. But that's going to be wide receiver Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears. And despite his talent, it is just not working out between him and rookie quarterback Justin Fields. He probably will have a decent game eventually, but you just can't put him in your lineup waiting for that game to happen. If you've been playing him this whole way, you might not have won a game this year, man. He's been doing absolutely nothing. He's been a bust for fantasy. This offense is just despicably bad lately. You just can't put him in your lineups right now. So for me, Allen Robinson is a wide receiver 4 play at best. My final wide receiver sit-em is going to be Tim Patrick, wide receiver of the Denver Broncos. And he has been a really solid fantasy option in Jerry Jeudy's absence. So Jerry Jeudy is one of the top wide receiver options along with Courtland Sutton. Those two were their top 2 wide receiver options in Denver. Jerry Jeudy went on IR. He's missed the last handful of games. And Tim Patrick has been solid as their wide receiver 2 in Denver. But Jerry Jeudy is making his return this week against the Washington football team, which will more than likely cut into Tim Patrick's targets. It'll cut into his workload in general. And it will inevitably make Tim Patrick the 3rd wide receiver on the team. You can make a case that maybe Jerry Jeudy won't see a full amount of snaps, but it's just a little too crowded there for me to like Tim Patrick this week. And even though the matchup is good, I am going to advise you guys to sit Tim Patrick this week against the Washington football team. And then I think it's fitting that we wrap up this list with another Chicago Bear. And sort of like Allen Robinson, it's not really the player's fault. It's more just a result of the offense in general. And the player I'm going to advise you guys to sit is Cole Kmet, tight end for the Chicago Bears. He's a guy that I've been seeing on some sleeper lists, someone that's kind of coming up. He's being a little bit more relevant for fantasy. He's seeing some targets here and there. So I do think he has potential to be relevant throughout the season, but I just would not start him this week against the 49ers. I think that it's just not going to be a great game for the Bears in general. And I think you can probably do better than Cole Kmet at that tight end position. And that's going to do it for this list, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure to drop a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel for more fantasy football content, and I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.